So it's been a minute since I've made a video, and it's 100% due to the fact that I've been getting ready to move and have moved into a new home. There are some lessons learned and some thoughts that I have on moving a smart home as I do go through this process. So I'm going to take you through what I think about it and some of the lessons that I've learned so far. There are many more to come, I'm sure, and just kind of talk about moving a smart home. So let's get started. All right, let's just jump right into the thoughts and lessons that I've learned. Even in my old house, there are some things I wish I had done initially when I first had that house built years ago. One of which is pre wire everything. Even if you don't think you're going to need a camera in one place or an Ethernet jack in another place, or you'll never use whatever in a certain place, wire it anyway, because it makes it a lot easier to install things later on, and you want as much stuff wired as possible. Wi-Fi is great, but if you're in a congested area with a lot of Wi-Fi neighbors, you're going to have issues off and on with some of those devices. So cameras, for example, you want to have those wired absolutely as much as you can, just because of the bandwidth used and how stable they will be under a wired environment. In addition, if you buy a PoE switch, like the TP-Link Omada series that I switched to in the new house, you will be able to power those cameras over the Ethernet line rather than having to run power to them as a separate thing. And wiring those cameras, it took me about 5 minutes per camera to put it up. There was one cable that was wrong. They had wired it incorrectly on the connector. I rewired it. Everything came up wonderfully and everything's working great. So pre-wire. And if you are going to pre-wire and think about pre-wire, then pre-wire. I can't say enough about pre-wiring. Put in more than you think you need. And then make sure, obviously, it comes back to a central location, such as your closet or your equipment room or your server room or wherever you're going to have your home lab. The best place that you can put it for centrally locating all of your stuff. The second lesson I'm going to talk about is labeling the devices. Now, in Texas or in my neighborhood or area, whatever, I don't know the real estate laws. Let me take a moment, by the way, and say what I'm about to say about certain things is my opinion. It is not fact. It is not law. I am not an expert in real estate transactions or anything related to that. I was told, though, that if you leave something physically attached to a house and you sell it, it must remain with the house. So if you're going to take your cameras with you, if you're going to take your wired wall switches, all of those things, make sure you take them off in advance. I went to what I call a dumb house for a little bit while we were showing the house to sell it so that none of that stuff was going to stay with the house. It was tough, but I made it through without having some of my smart switches. When you do remove that, though, label these things. I did not, and I am now learning that lesson. When I go to a box and I have, 10 of these GE or Zeus or whatever brand switches that have no markings on them whatsoever on where they came from, when I go to put them back in, I don't know where to put them. And interestingly enough, I have a front porch, I have a back porch, I have a garage, I have a kitchen, all those things that are pretty standard in homes these days, where I had switches before. Now I don't know which switches go where. I was able to wire in so far a total of 3 smart switches in my new house. And only one of the 3 is where it used to be, which leaves me a whole nother pile of issues with renaming stuff. If you have to put in a new switch and you want to rename it, you kind of got to go through a little bit of craziness with that. If I go over to my integrations under Z-Wave, which ties it all into Home Assistant, and I start trying to find out which device it is, it makes it a little bit difficult to do that. So first of all, I had to identify which device was actually the correct device. And then I had to come over here and I had to rename it. So in the example, I put in a new front porch light switch, or an existing front porch light switch. But it was actually the deck lights. So I had to go in here, and first of all, if you try to rename something that is the same name as something else, you're going to have a problem. It's going to mess things up. So already you can start seeing where I'm going with this. If you label things before you take them out or as you take them out and you put them back in the same spot, all your automations are going to work the same way. You're not going to have trouble identifying which device it is, and it'll just make life in general easier. I don't know why I didn't think of that. I lost my mind for a moment, I guess, in the big move, so I didn't do that. So I had to rename the deck or the front porch, original front porch light to something else. I don't even know what it is now. And then rename the deck lights switch that I put in the front porch to the front porch, and I gave it an extra name here. One of the things you'll notice here is I'm going to have to understand this, and to be totally honest with you, I don't really understand what happened here, and someone in the comments will tell me what's going on, I'm sure, but I renamed this type to a driveway light. It's a type of light instead of, where is it at here? Well, one of these things lets me change it to type light switch. Well, anyway, I did that. I changed it to a light versus a switch. It put this hidden, and I can't actually unhide this here. It's hidden by the integration. So now I have some orphan devices, and that becomes a whole nother problem if you start having a bunch of orphan devices. And at the end of the video, I'll talk about whether you should start over or not in some cases. But I wanted to do as much as I could as quickly as I could, so I'm trying to reuse stuff and rename it. It may turn out that it gets to be such a mess when I'm done that I just go ahead and rename everything and start from scratch. All right, so the next thought is kind of along these lines. Assume that you want everything to run the way you did in the old house before you moved. For example, your automations, your sensors, all of those things, if you want them to run the same way, then you just rename your devices as you put them in. The idea here is that you're picking up your Home Assistant hub, which is a beautiful thing, right? You just take the device you're running on. In my case, it's a Home Assistant Blue. I unplug it from where it is in the old house, put it in the right spot in the new house so it reaches all of the areas for Z-Wave and all of the Zigbee and whatever else I'm running. And then I turn it on. I don't have to rebuild my automations. I just have to make sure things like this device actually are named properly so that they work right. Now, just if you remember when I talked about this a second ago, this little thing caused me some problems. Before I renamed this properly, and I had to rename it twice, every time I would arm the alarm system, my front driveway lights would turn off because they were the old deck lights. And at nighttime, I wanted the deck lights off and the driveway lights to stay on whenever the alarm was turned on. So I had to go back and troubleshoot the problem. And that's like lesson number, whatever we're on, 5, 6, 5. Expect the unexpected. Things are not going to work exactly as they did before unless you're 100% perfect on renaming and everything is in the right spot and all of it just does what it's supposed to. A couple things too is that when you move things around in a new house, your mesh network for your Z-Wave or your Zigbee or whatever else you're running is going to have to re-heal itself and build out that network all over again, which may take a couple of days once you have all your devices in, for everything to know the best path back to the controllers. So just keep that in mind as you're going along. Things may seem slow at the beginning, and then it'll start getting better and better as you go along. So just keep in mind, things are not going to work as you expect them to from the get-go. You're not going from an exact replica of one place to an exact replica of the other place. You're going to have some variations in your switches and whatnot. Which brings me to another point. Through the wisdom of the builder that we have today in this new house, I think we have three-way switches, three-way, not two-way, three-way, and we have at least two-way switches. And I've never done those before in Home Assistant. So that will be a learning experience for me, and I will pass it along to y'all whenever I figure it out. It's going to be, it can be done. Lots of people do it now. I just need to figure out the best method for putting those in. And it might actually end up better because when you start looking at a box that has 4 switches in it and you need a neutral for every one of your smart switches, if you can use one of those switches where your 3-way or 2-way is basically a battery powered switch where you don't have wiring behind it, you don't have to connect all of the wiring to it. You only connect it to the main switch for the light or whatever you're controlling. It saves you trying to figure out how to cram all of that in there. I already ran into an issue in which I had 3 switches in a box, and they used a wire nut about the size of a small automobile to tie all the neutrals together, and then probably a jackhammer to get the wiring into the box to make the original switches fit. And me trying to make a switch, and you'll notice that these switches are slightly deeper. This is an older one, so there's some that are less deep now. But these are slightly deeper than some of the other switches that you can get, or just the straight up on off switches. So getting these in the box and cramming those back into all of the wiring that's in there, it's for lack of a better term, it's awful. I don't like it. Which is another point I'm going to make. I don't know what I'm on, 7 or 8. If you're builder and you're going into a new install and your builder says, hey, we have a package for installing smart switches, you may consider letting them put all those things in for you, and then you just repair them, reconnect them, repair them to your new hub or your home assistant hub. That was an option for us. It was expensive. I didn't really want to pay the price for all the switches they were offering because I could get them a lot cheaper. I would say they were charging something like $130 a switch, and I can get them for like 40 or 30, depending on the switch. So to me, it's a waste of money if I can do it myself. However, trying to cram all these switches into that little box, maybe it's worth it to you all to do that. And especially if you're not used to playing with electricity, that's another issue to be aware of. Okay, so I'm just kind of rambling along here, thoughts and whatnot, just trying to let y'all know my thoughts on this whole move thing. We talked about expecting the unexpected. Double check everything, just like the driveway lights came on and turned off when they weren't supposed to. You need to, once you start install something and you go check your automation, make sure it's right, you need to check it all. You need to test it and make sure it comes on when it's supposed to. Even when you force it on or off through your testing, make sure it actually runs when it's supposed to. For example, sunset is when my front lights come on outside. I want those to always come on at sunset, and then sometime after sunrise in the morning, they turn off. If that isn't happening, go back and fix your automations or figure out what happened. In my case, this whole switch thing here, naming of this particular light, really was a problem. And so far, I've only gotten 3 switches in. So I may run into more issues later on once I get all of the rest of these switches installed. So check, double check, test everything, make sure it all works out. It's just common sense stuff. And we talked about the changes, right? Let's just assume that this was my kitchen light switch. And I pulled it out. It controlled one set of lights, bunch of pot lights in my kitchen. Well, in the new house, like I mentioned, my kitchen lights, I actually have pendant lights, and I have lights that are controlled with a 2-way switch that are like the pot lights. So I need a 2-way switch for the pot lights, or 2-way switch solution, and I need a single switch for the other one. So I'm not going to be able to just put this light switch in. I'm going to have to get something like a Zoo switch, or something that has those little fake switches that you can put in everywhere that the 2 or 3-way switches are at, and then I can just run it that way. I'm actually excited about that, because if those things work the way they're supposed to and they last a while, then I don't have to worry about wiring those switches up. I just cap off those switches and be done with it. All right, what else do we want to talk about? I mentioned about whether or not you should just start from scratch. That's going to be 100% up to how you feel about doing all of this. And the reason being, I have, and let's just take a quick look at what I do or what I have for my automations. But I have all of these automations that are already set up for everything that happens or was happening, except for disabled, obviously, the ones in my old house. I don't want to recreate all of these automations. So if I were to start over, I would have to build this all out. And maybe that's good. Maybe after 4 or 5 years of making videos and doing everything else I was supposed to or been doing with this, that maybe it's time for a fresh start. That's going to really be up to you. And one of the biggest things here, again, don't flame me for Node-RED or not Node-RED. I saw some comments on my Discord about how Node-RED's trash. It works great for me. I love being able to visualize everything that's going on in all of my flows here, being able to turn things on and off, being able to test easily. For example, the lights I'm talking about here, turning on these driveway lights, turning them off. I can force them on, force them off, and then I can tell that they're working the way they're supposed to when the automation actually runs. So I have a ton of automations that run through Node-RED here. So me rebuilding everything would just be painful. So I opted to go with, let's just try to plug the switches in and make them work. That being said, I do have a number of Wi-Fi switches, and that's going to bring me to one of my final points. You can see back here on my whatever that is back there. I'm still trying to build out the studio space here. That is my old Unify setup. I opted to switch to the TP-Link Omada line of stuff. It's still a kind of prosumer type of setup. It has the controller. I mean, they look almost identical to Unify. I'm assuming that I don't know the legal situation between those two companies, but the interfaces are pretty darn close. So if you're used to using Unify, you're going to be pretty comfortable using TP-Link Omada stuff. Couple reasons I use using Omada now. One, I can run that controller on a number of different things. It's being maintained, from what I understand. It's probably maintained better than Unify's. I don't have any scientific proof of that, but that's what I've been reading about. The second thing is this is a USG Pro gateway behind me, and I've got a couple of PoE switches on top of it. In my old house, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 PoE switches to cover all of the different areas, primarily because I didn't have everything wired and pre-wired, so I had to do some weird stuff. In the new house, and here's a picture of the rack, you will see that I have one TP-Link Omada switch. It's a 24-port PoE switch. It allows me to power all of my PoE devices, all my cameras and everything else. There's plenty of capacity. That switch alone, along with 2 EAP access points and the gateway router, cost me about the same as buying one of the 24-port switches from Unify. So I got basically a brand new complete network setup for the same price, with the Unify. And this is not sponsored. No one sponsored this. I bought it all myself. The second reason I did that was the Unify stuff was running in the old home, and I needed to keep it up and running until we moved out and still set up the new house with the new stuff. So I got it all. I ran 2 networks for a week or 2 while we were doing the transition. So I figured I would start fresh. I got Wi-Fi 6 now, where I didn't have that before. And I have my 2 APs like I did before, a switch that powers everything and whatnot. All right, so just some thoughts, rambling thoughts on moving to a new house. I'm sure there's a lot of things I didn't cover, things that I'm going to be learning as I go along. Trying to think of anything else that came up. Oh, one other thing with I got a garage controller, and it uses an integration from Aladdin Connect. It's cloud-based, and I chose to leave behind a couple of things that are. Show you here. I chose to leave behind a couple of things. One of which is the garage controller that I had at the house, and I'm still waiting to see how this is going to play out. This particular garage door controller is cloud-based. There is an integration for it, and it talks back to my local network. But in order for me to get updates on whether the garage door closed or open for my automations, I have to go out to the cloud. Time will tell how quick that is and how reliable it is. If it starts to be a problem, I'm going to try to figure out if I can use something like the original garage door controller I got before and plug it into the wires and control it and actuate it that way. Just because I'm not really happy with a cloud-based solution, especially for something like the garage door where I need to know if it's open or closed. And I can do that very easily with Home Assistant versus having a cloud-based. So we'll see what happens on that. All right, I think that's all I'm going to cover for now. There's a lot more stuff that I'm going to go and do and set up and hook up and everything else. But those things I will work on as we go. One more thing. The final point is to be patient. This is going to take some time. You didn't build your smart home in a day when you originally had it. If you're moving to a new one, you won't do that either. There are a lot of competing interests. Installing ceiling fans and lights and getting stuff put in the proper places and fixing doors and all the little things that come with moving to a new house that isn't even related to smart home stuff. So take your time, prioritize as you need to, especially with the acceptance factor in your household. How much can you get away with on the smart stuff while you're trying to help get everything else squared away, new routines, new locations, all of that other stuff that comes along with moving. All right, I'm going to shut up now because this is, again, longer than I thought it was going to be. Just some talking through some basic stuff with a house move and some thoughts that I've had so far. Many more lessons to be learned on my part for this as we go along and build this stuff out. All right, I will, what will I do? I will thank you for watching the video, first of all. And for those that support me either through memberships of YouTube, through Ko-fi, Patreon, I really appreciate that. It helps me keep things going and being able to do the stuff that I do on these videos and talk to you about stuff. If you're not a subscriber, it's down there. Doesn't cost you anything. Push that button real fast. And it really helps out the algorithms and all the other junk that goes along with making sure that people can see my content. All right. Y'all have a great rest of whatever is left of your day, weekend, whatever, and we will see you on the next video.